There are moments when the mind becomes too small for what it experiences, when perception bends and the edges of reality curl back like pages of a burning book. One man spoke of such a moment. He had entered a world opened by a small dose of DMT, but what he found there did not feel chemical or imagined. It felt eternal. As soon as he inhaled, his surroundings folded inward. Color evaporated into geometry, and something vast pulled him through. He said the air became alive with motion, as if he had fallen into the blueprint of the universe. The walls of the room dissolved, and in their place were pulsating shapes of light, forming and unforming as though consciousness itself were sculpting. His sense of self drifted outward. He no longer felt his body, yet he existed more intensely than ever before. He described seeing what looked like an infinite mirror, each reflection showing him as a child, a teenager, an old man, and something beyond human. Every version of himself looked back with understanding, not pity. He could not tell if minutes passed or lifetimes. The sensation of time had vanished. He felt that he was being shown something, an unspoken truth about who he was before birth and after death. There were sounds, not music, but vibrations that seemed to speak directly to thought. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it all fell away. He gasped, lungs burning, eyes wet, shaking with the immensity of what he had seen. When he looked around, the world was the same yet utterly different. The objects on the table, the pattern on the floor, the light through the blinds, all of it shimmered with a depth he had never noticed. He said that afterward, ordinary life felt like a dream, and that sometimes when he blinked, he could still sense that other place hovering just beyond sight. He spent months trying to put it into words, and every attempt fell short. He spoke of love that wasn't emotional but structural, as if love was the material from which existence was built. He also spoke of fear, the fear that reality itself might be fragile, and that behind the curtain was something so immense that no human could bear to see it for long. His story lingered with listeners because it wasn't just about drugs or hallucination. It was about the boundary between mind and universe. He had crossed that line, if only for a moment, and came back unable to fit back inside the shape of who he had been. He said his appetite changed, his sleep changed, even his face seemed different. Strangers told him he looked calmer, he felt lighter, he had carried away a kind of peace but also a loneliness because he could not share it fully. The world around him seemed busy and loud while he carried silence in his chest. He said that silence was both a gift and a curse. There was something similar in another story told later by a man who had come near death, not through psychedelics but through pure accident. He was an actor known for physical intensity, the kind of perfor. Mayor, who did not fake pain. One winter morning, while trying to clear snow, the machine he used turned against him. The weight of the metal crushed his ribs and legs, bones snapping like branches beneath ice. He remembered the moment of impact only in flashes, the sharp cold, the metallic taste in his mouth, the sudden rush of helplessness. He was trapped under thousands of pounds, air squeezed out of his lungs. He said he looked up at the gray sky and thought, this is it. But someone found him. Rescue crews came. He was conscious when they pulled him free, yet he drifted in and out of awareness, hearing his own heartbeat slow, hearing voices fade. In the hospital, he hovered at the edge for days. The doctors told him later how close it was. Dozens of bones had been shattered. Plates, screws, stitches, blood transfusions. He became more metal than man. Each breath was a battle. He remembered looking down once and not recognizing his own body. The skin was swollen and purple, the limbs full of tubes. He said that in those weeks, time again became distorted. He could not tell if it was morning or night. Pain blurred everything. But somewhere inside, he made a decision to live, even if it meant years of rebuilding. He measured his recovery not in days but in tiny victories, moving a finger, then a hand, then sitting up for a moment without fainting. He said there were nights when he cried not from pain but from gratitude, just to feel alive, to feel a heartbeat inside his chest. When he finally walked again, people called it miraculous. He didn't. He said it was work, brutal and endless. Each motion felt like breaking and healing at once. But when he looked back at the snow, at the machine that had nearly ended him, he didn't feel anger. He felt awe. He said that facing death had stripped him of pretense. Everything superficial burned away. He no longer feared failure, reputation, or embarrassment. Once you've looked death in the eyes, he said, you see that most things people worry about are small shadows. The first man had touched the edge of existence through mind, the second through body. Both returned with the same truth whispered in different languages. That life is fragile and enormous at once. That consciousness itself is an ocean, and that each breath carries a weight we often forget to feel. War never really ends for the people who fought it. It pauses, hides, waits for quiet moments to breathe again through memory. One man came on the podcast not to glorify what he did, but because silence had become unbearable. He had been a soldier, part of missions whose details still couldn't be shared. He said that when the dust of battle settled, when the gunfire faded, something in him stayed behind, stuck in those broken streets where every corner might explode. Brew, he came home decorated but empty. The uniform was folded neatly in his closet, but inside he was still wearing it. He moved through normal life as if watching from underwater. Crowds made his pulse quicken. A car backfiring could make his knees buckle. Every sound was a trigger. At night, he couldn't sleep without reliving the faces of those he had lost. He'd wake drenched in sweat, lungs aching, fists clenched, his heart pounding as if he were still in the fight. His wife tried to understand, but words failed. How could he explain to anyone what it felt like to carry ghosts? He talked about the first time he realized he was breaking. It wasn't dramatic. It was an ordinary morning, sitting in his kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and realizing an hour had passed without a single conscious thought. He had drifted away somewhere dark. He wondered if this was what it meant to go insane, to live physically in one place while your mind stayed on the battlefield. Therapy helped a little. Medication helped a little, but the nights remained long. He didn't want to admit how close he came to ending it. But something unexpected saved him speaking. A friend invited him to tell his story publicly. At first, he refused. He didn't want pity, but one day, he stood in front of a small audience and began to talk. The words came out rough, shaking, but they came. As he spoke, he noticed people listening, really listening, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He said it was as if a valve had opened inside him. Every time he spoke, the pressure lessened. He described how others came to him afterwards, strangers who whispered that they felt the same. That's when he realized the power of truth. His trauma wasn't unique. It was shared by thousands who never found words for it. So he kept talking. He started working with veterans, helping them find their voices. He became a bridge between silence and survival. He said healing wasn't sudden, it came like sunrise, inch by inch, light creeping over the horizon of his pain. He began to rebuild his life, slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly. He learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about forgiving himself for surviving. He carried guilt for years, thinking he didn't deserve peace when others never made it home. But eventually, he learned that living well was its own tribute to those lost. Every sunrise, every laugh, every hug was a form of remembrance. Sometimes he still woke up in panic. Sometimes he still saw flashes of those places, but he no longer let them define him. He became a man who could stand in a crowd again, who could walk down a street without checking every rooftop. The ghosts didn't vanish, but they softened, became teachers instead of tormentors. Listening to him, you understood that his story wasn't just about war. It was about what happens when the noise stops. It was about how easily we can lose ourselves in survival mode and forget how to live. He said that people think bravery means charging into battle, but real bravery is coming home and facing your own mind. After his episode aired, messages poured pen from across the world. People who had never been in combat wrote that they related to him, to the sense of being stuck between who you were and who you want to be. His words became a kind of map for anyone walking through invisible pain. He often said he didn't want to be a hero anymore. He just wanted to be human. Ebru, the host, once asked what kept him going now. He said it was simple, small things. Morning coffee, the sound of rain on the window, the laughter of his kids, the touch of his wife's hand when nightmares woke him. He said those were the victories no medal could replace. It was strange how similar his story felt to the man with the DMT vision, Both had seen what lies beyond the limits of ordinary experience, one through chemicals, one through chaos. Both returned with the same kind of reverence for existence. They had faced the edge of the human condition, one by choice, one by circumstance. They came back changed, quieter, more aware. And it wasn't only men who told stories like these. Sometimes it was people from ordinary lives who discovered that ordinary could vanish in an instant. But each story, whether about war or near death or cosmic visions, seemed to spiral around the same center, that something inside the human soul is unbreakable. You can crush the body, you can drown the mind, but something always reaches for the light. When the soldier finished his story, there was a long silence, no applause, no clever commentary, just quiet, the kind of quiet that means everyone in the room felt something shift. He said he didn't tell it for attention, he told it because silence kills faster than bullets. He left with his head high, not proud in the way of medals and ranks, but proud that he had survived himself. He had learned that trauma is not the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of the real one. There are experiences that sit outside language, beyond proof, where belief and disbelief blur into the same trembling state of wonder. One such story came from a man who never expected to become the center of a mystery. He wasn't a dreamer or a conspiracy chaser. He worked hard, paid bills, lived quietly, but one night changed all that. He was driving through a desert road after sunset, the kind of road where the world falls silent except for the hum of the tires. The air was clear, stars spilling across the sky in dense clusters. He'd driven this route before, there was nothing special about it. Then, from nowhere, a light appeared on the horizon, at first faint, then impossibly bright. It wasn't headlights and it wasn't the moon. It hung suspended, silent, radiating a kind of cold luminescence that made the air itself shimmer. He slowed down, drawn forward without knowing why. The radio went dead. Static filled the speakers. The engine sputtered once, then steadied. He felt pressure in his ears, as though he had driven into a storm, but the sky was clear. He stopped the car and stepped out. The light pulsed onk. D. Then expanded. His body vibrated with a low hum that came from everywhere and nowhere. The next thing he remembered was waking up behind the wheel, engine off. His watch stopped. Hours had passed. He didn't remember getting back into the car. He tried to laugh it off, to tell himself it was exhaustion or some atmospheric trick. But when he got home, small details didn't make sense. His phone's clock and his dashboard clock disagreed by nearly 3 hours. There was a small burn on his wrist that hadn't been there before, shaped almost like a triangle. He didn't sleep that night. When he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of blue-white corridors and shadows moving in silence. He saw figures, not human, not monstrous, just alien to his understanding. He didn't speak about it for years. Who would believe him? Even he doubted himself, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been touched by something beyond comprehension. The strange part was how life began to change afterward. Electronics around him malfunctioned often. His dreams became vivid, prophetic at times. He said that once he dreamt of a plane crash and the next morning the news showed one almost identical. Coincidence, maybe. But he felt like his mind had been tuned to a frequency no one else could hear. He went through medical tests, everything appeared normal. He saw therapists, scientists, even skeptics. They all told him that stress, sleep deprivation, or imagination could explain it. But deep down, he knew that wasn't enough. He wasn't the same. He couldn't be. He had looked into something that looked back. He said, the hardest part was isolation. People laughed or stared politely. He lost friends. He stopped dating. He withdrew. He became obsessed with patterns in the sky, reading everything he could find about unidentified phenomena. But instead of finding answers, he found more questions. Still, there was a kind of peace in surrendering to the mystery. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He only needed to acknowledge that he had seen something real, even if no one else could. Years later, sitting in that studio, his voice shook as he told the story, not from fear, but from the memory of awe. He said that whatever he encountered that night didn't feel evil or good. It felt curious, like it was studying him as he studied it. It didn't want to harm, it wanted to show something. He said that for a brief moment he felt connected to everything, to the stars, to time, to every living thing that ever was. Then it was gone, and life shrank again to human proportions. Hebrew listeners debated endlessly afterward. Was it sleep paralysis, missing time syndrome, a hallucination, or genuine contact? But to him, it didn't matter. The truth was that he had felt something vast, and once you feel that, the ordinary world never quite fits the same. His story blurred naturally into another that felt entirely different yet carried the same tone of the unknown. The story of survival not in space or vision, but in raw nature. There was a man who decided to spend a few days hiking alone through remote wilderness, somewhere in the Rockies. It was supposed to be cleansing, a break from the noise of cities and deadlines. He carried supplies, maps, confidence. But mountains don't care about confidence. On the second day, weather changed. The air grew colder, clouds rolled in fast, snow began to fall heavy, wet, blinding. Trails vanished, his compass fogged. He kept moving, but the landmarks blurred into white nothingness. By the time he realized he was lost, darkness was already closing in. He built a small fire, ate sparingly, and told himself rescue would come. But by the third day, food was nearly gone. The firewood soaked. The isolation began to play tricks. Every sound felt amplified. A cracking branch, a gust of wind, the whisper of snow sliding off pine needles. He thought of his family, of the simple things he had taken for granted, the warmth of a kitchen, the smell of coffee, the hum of a refrigerator. He understood then how thin the layer of comfort was between civilization and nature. He walked during the day and froze during the night, his mind slipping between panic and prayer. He stopped thinking in words and began thinking in instincts. Fire, water, shelter. He said the hardest part wasn't hunger or cold, it was silence. Silence so deep that it felt like pressure. It pressed against his ears until he could hear his heartbeat echoing through his skull. He had never known how loud loneliness could be. One morning he saw a streak of sunlight through the clouds. He followed it downhill, stumbled over rocks, slipped in ice. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but the sound of water ahead kept him moving. He found a creek, followed it downstream for hours until at last he saw something man-made, a wooden bridge, a sign of civilization. He cried, though no one was there to see it. When rescuers found him 2 days later, he had frostbite on his fingers, cracked lips, and eyes that looked older by years. He said he never felt fear of death again after that. He had met it, negotiated with it, and walked away. That wilderness story and the UFO story seemed opposite, one about sky, one about earth. Yet both were about facing the unknown alone. One man was lifted into mystery, the other was buried in it. Both came out changed. Each episode, each confession carried a quiet echo. The human spirit is drawn to the edge. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe defiance, maybe destiny. But again and again, people find themselves staring into something vast, terrified yet transfixed. And when they return, they never quite speak the same way.